Have you ever had something that you found out was bad for you, so you just had to get rid of it completely? When I was a kid, I was breaking out in hives all over, and my mom couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally, she started testing the laundry detergent and the fabric softener. And come to find out, all the brands that she had been using were causing me to break out, and she had to get rid of all of those. And she ended up with only one brand of fabric softener and laundry detergent that she could use with me. Otherwise, I would break out in hives. So she just got rid of everything else and only did that one thing. Do you have anything like that in your life that you had to get rid of because it maybe caused harm? Leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Welcome to The Whole Truth, everyone, where I am taking you through the entire Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation without skipping anything. If that sounds good to you, make sure to reach down and hit the little subscribe button so every time I put out another video and we go a little further through the Bible, you can keep up with us. Now, today we are talking about Leviticus chapter 13 and picking up in verse 47. We're still talking about leprosy. There's this whole chapter in the Bible dedicated to this disease of leprosy. Now, I want to say from the onset that this is a real disease for real people, and this is how they dealt with it in a real time in history. There is no question in my mind about that. However, I believe we see some very practical application, as we saw in the last video, that leprosy really makes a pretty good picture or symbol of sin. Well, today we're going to read about what to do with the garments of the person who had leprosy, or the garments that have been on someone that has leprosy or had leprosy. Okay, so pick this up with me. This is Leviticus chapter 13 and verse 47. We'll read through the end of the chapter. You ready? In Leviticus 13 and 47, also if a garment has a leprous plague in it, whether it is in the woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or the woof of a linen or wool, whether in leather or in anything made of leather. And if the plague is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, whether in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, it is a leprous plague, and it shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the plague and isolate that which has the plague 7 days. And he shall examine the plague on the seventh day, and if the plague has spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in the leather or anything made of leather, the plague is an act of leprosy. It is unclean. He shall therefore burn that garment in which is the plague, whether warp or woof, in the wool or in linen, or anything of leather, for it is an active leprosy. The garment shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which is the plague, and he shall isolate it another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine the plague after it has been washed, and indeed, if the plague has not changed its color, though the plague has not spread, it is unclean, and you shall burn it in the fire. It continues eating away, whether the damage is outside or inside. If the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has faded after washing it, then he shall tear it out of the garment, whether out of the warp or out of the woof or out of the leather. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in anything made of leather, it is a spreading plague, and you shall burn it with fire, in which is the plague. And if you wash the garment, either warp or woof, or whatever is made of leather, if the plague has disappeared from it, then it shall be washed a second time and shall be clean. This is the law of the leprous plague in a garment of wool or linen, either of warp or woof, or anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. Okay, so I think that, first of all, we should just recognize that's a real way to deal with, in the ancient world, this was a way of dealing with stopping the spread of this very awful disease called leprosy. We talked in the last video about how it would make appendages fall off, fingers fall off, fingernails, your nose would fall off, lips would fall off, teeth would fall out, their faces would literally collapse. It was an awful and ugly disease. And to keep that down, to keep that away from everyone, the person who was diagnosed with that, and it was a a way to get there, wasn't it? Like a couple of weeks, the priest would examine the person, isolate the person. But if after a few weeks the person was showing that they had leprosy, they had to cover their mouth and they had to leave the city saying unclean, unclean, unclean on their way out. And we talked about how the priest would be probably weeping and the person would be weeping. This was a terrible and tragic time to go through. Okay, so now we're dealing with their garment in a real physical way to keep the plague down. They take the garment and they burn it if it has this leprous plague in it. And this is the way that they examined it. I'm not going to try to claim some medical stance here. I don't know about the medical side of this. I can only look at this and say, this is how they dealt with it. And I also see some really good practical application for you and I. And that practical application comes like this. Leprosy represented or made a good picture of a good representation of sin. In this way, this is what we ought to do with the things that cause us to sin. If you think of anything else in your life, if you start to realize that thing is bad for you, you want to get it out of your life. If you're somebody who's had problems in your home with mold, and maybe you've had maybe somebody in your house, your children or a spouse or somebody that's living there in your home, they're having trouble, mold issues. Maybe they're getting sick. I have a family member who every time he is around mold, like if we were ever working on something that had mold in it because we did furniture or whatever, his face would swell up, his nasal cavity would just get all infected. I mean, one time his whole face just got totally swelled up because of mold. And so whenever we got those projects that we knew there was mold in the project, like let's say we were working on a boat and we knew there was mold in the project, we would tell him, don't get anywhere near this because we don't want you to get sick. And so we didn't want to put him around that, right? That's what you do with something. Just like I told you in my example in the beginning, if you find something that's, it's making me break out when I was a kid, what did my mom do? She got rid of that thing that was making me break out. And she did what? She got something, replaced it with something that didn't make me break out. How much more should we apply that in our own lives with sin? Sin brings death. We read that in the last video. We talked about that. When our desire has opportunity, when our lust and our desire has opportunity, and we sin, what does sin bring? Sin brings death. For the wages of sin is death. As a matter of fact, all of the evil and the bad that is in the world, the fact is that it comes back to sin because mankind has sin in his life. And sin is the thing that separates us from God. And as I said in the last video, it's also the thing that many times separates us from each other. And yet, how often do we allow it in our lives? We don't want to do the things that get it out of our life. Like, we don't want the effects of it. But many times I find that people do still want the sin itself. Let me read you a couple of Bible verses to maybe explain what I'm saying to you here. In Romans chapter 12, and then I'm going to read chapter 6 rather, and verse 12. I'm going to read through verse 14. In Romans 6 and verse 12, therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in its lust. Get that? Don't let sin reign in your mortal body, and do not present your members as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for you are not under the law, but under grace. How awesome is that? Don't let sin reign. Don't let it have control. I like when I heard Tony Evans one time say, don't let the devil have a foothold in your life. You need to get rid of the garment that has leprosy. You need to get rid of the thing that is causing the sin because you don't want the consequence of the sin. How much sense does that make if we just think about the other context of that? If we put that in any other context, this thing is causing me harm. I want to get rid of it. Jesus said it this way. It's hyperbole, and it has upset many people. I've been asked this question about this verse 1,000 times. I think that this leper's garment in this verse I'm about to read to you out of Matthew, I think that it makes pretty good sense. In Matthew chapter 5 and verse 29, we read this. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than your whole body be cast into hell. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. For it's more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And someone would say, is Jesus telling us to pluck our eyes out or cut our hands off? No, that's hyperbole. What he is saying is to divide yourself, separate yourself from, cut off those things that would cause you to sin. Your right eye is not the thing causing. First of all, how could your right eye only cause you to sin, right? And even more so, if we're going to talk about that, shouldn't we talk, where is it coming from? That sin is not coming from the eye itself. The sin is coming from your brain, right? I mean, your heart even. The sin is coming from your desire. So plucking your eye out is not going to get rid of that. But I'll tell you this, here's a good practical application for you. If your cell phone is causing you to sin, you could put that away. And this is where it starts to get hard, doesn't it? Because we live in kind of a time where we go, wait a second, but the first thing you're going to say to me about your cell phone is, but I need my cell phone. I mean, friends, do you? Like, would it be better for your right eye to be cast into hell than for your whole body to perish? Do you see that? Like, it's not actually your right eye, but maybe that thing that we're always holding. You know, pornography has been on such a rampage, and it's no surprise why. It's in our hands all day long. It's in our pockets. And so you go in the bathroom stall at work, and it's still right there. And goodness, it's on the advertisements, and in a lesser way, it's like right there on social media. It's there. It's present all the time. And if that temptation is overcoming you, don't let sin reign in your mortal body. Don't give Satan a foothold. Cast out the leprous garment. Burn it. Get rid of it. Get you an old school flip phone that all you can do is call and text. And maybe you say, well, Justin, that's my problem. I'm committing adultery and it's calls and text that I'm using. Well, then friends, get rid of the cell phone altogether. You know what my wife and I did? We had Samsung cell phones, and so we actually linked our cell phones on the same account. So anything I got on the internet on my end, she could see the history on her end. And anything that she did on her end, I could see on my end. And we linked all kinds of messaging apps and anything that we could link together. That way we could see what each other was doing. And we weren't doing that. There was no problem in our life. We were not even struggling with the temptation of it, but we didn't want it to get there. And so we made sure that we kept up. We looked at each other's phones often. There was no issue there. If she ever picked up my phone or I picked up hers, we could see each other's phones because we didn't want that temptation. But maybe for you, maybe that's a temptation. Maybe it's not the cell phone for you, but maybe it's alcohol. Maybe it's a drug. Maybe it's a person. Friends, sometimes it's best for you to cut that thing off. Cut it out of your life. If there's a toxic person in your life that continues to bring you down, if you've got somebody in your life that tempts you to sin, cut it off and get rid of that. Because it would be better to be rid of that person in your life. And sure, in that moment, would it sting? Would it hurt? Yeah, probably. In the ancient world, do you know how valuable garments were? Like we're used to going to Walmart or going to, you probably don't buy your clothes at Walmart, but I'm cheap like that. I'll get a shirt from Walmart. I don't care. But wherever maybe you go to a store and maybe you go to Kohl's or something and you go and buy yourself a shirt. You just pick it right up off the rack and you buy it. But in the ancient world, like weaving took time, and to have a garments were very expensive and very precious. And so they didn't have closets full of garments the way that we do. So to give up your garment, yeah, that would be hard. But would it be better than having your face collapse? Yeah. So that they would be willing to get rid of that. How much more should we be willing to cut those things out of our life that are causing sin that we know brings death? How much better would your marriage look? How much better would your relationship with your kids look? How much better would your job be going if you would cut that thing out of your life, get rid of it, get rid of the leprous garment? Because God has better things for you. Don't let sin reign in your mortal bodies. Friends, you're not under the law. You're under grace. And you can cut those things out of your life. By the power of the blood of Jesus, you can be delivered. But if you're walking around with that temptation and you're refusing to get rid of the temptation, friends, sometimes you're causing your own downfall. All right, I know that that's a tough word, but that's a word for somebody. I think that's a good word for all of us. If there's something in your life that you need to get rid of that leprous garment. You'd rather not have that in your life. You'll be better off without it. All right, I hope you'll come back and join me tomorrow as we talk about Leviticus chapter 14. See you then.